Okay, we're gonna wait for about a minute for a few more people to join and then we'll start. Okay, so it's 5:05. So welcome everyone to the Self-Care is Healthcare workshop. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ava and I'll be your host for today. So just to introduce our organization, Generation Science is a student-led nonprofit organization that fosters innovative thinking among scientists and healthcare leaders for the next generation. So in today's discussion, we'll be talking about preventing burnout and stress with two amazing guest speakers, Paige and Wale. Then we'll move on to the physiological impacts of mental illness, which includes acid reflux, stress on the body, cardiovascular disease, and trauma on the brain. And then we'll have Dr. Jennifer Perezini speak about her research in PTSD and how she's created a biotech product that revolutionizes the way PTSD is being diagnosed. So first, let's start by discussing what is mental health. What does it really mean? So most people confuse mental health for mental illness. Mental illnesses are severe conditions that disrupt our thoughts and feelings. For example, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Whereas mental health is a state of well-being, and everyone has a mental health, just like how everyone has a physical health. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being, and our mental health affects how we feel, think, and act. Mental health is very important because our state of mind determines how we handle situations and make decisions throughout our lives. So how is mental health just as important as our physical well-being? Well, people tend to ignore their mental health and focus more on their physical well-being, but our mental health is just as important and we have to look after it in order to have a healthy life. It's important because life is not just about surviving and looking after your body. You need to take care of your mind and mental health in order to have a sense of purpose and handle the ups and downs of life. Everyone has a mental health. From childhood to adolescence into adulthood, everyone has a mental well-being and they must remember to take care of it because it will affect their everyday lives and overall well-being. Mental health disorders can be short or long-term and interfere with mood, behavior, and thinking, and the ability to relate to others. Now, what does a good mental health look like? Well, you should have a sense of purpose, strong relationships, being able to feel connected to others, having a good sense of self, being able to cope with stress, and enjoying life.
Next, we'll look at the impact that being in isolation has had on people's mental health. A UK-based study that was released mid-April this year showed that the act of social distancing resulted in increased feelings of anxiety and depression. This was most common in those with low-paid or unstable jobs. This loss of in-person social interaction, income, structure, and routine led to psychological and emotional losses, including a loss of motivation, meaning, and self-worth. One of the main concerns these participants had in the study was the uncertain duration of these measures, and if the virus were to stay around for a long time, how they would be able to cope. Another study released in 2018 showed that almost half of its 20,000 participants reported sometimes or always feeling alone. A loneliness index was used in the study, and it showed that Gen Z adults, meaning those aged 18 to 22, had the highest loneliness score of 48.3, and the silent generation, meaning those aged 72 and older, had the lowest loneliness score with a score of 38.6. As you may notice, mental illnesses impact people of all ages, and therefore the importance of wellness should be noted by everyone.
So our first set of speakers for this evening will be Paige and Wale. Paige has over 10 years of experience as a psychiatric nurse in British Columbia and is currently pursuing a Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology with hopes to start a private practice in January of 2020. She has a passion for helping others to achieve mental wellness and highlighting issues in nursing and mental health. Wale works with the team at Tally to provide a safe space, where members of the public can offer peer-to-peer support and share mental health-related experiences with each other. Tale aims to change the mental health stigma by making mental health-related conversations part of the norm. This is being achieved through Tally Talk, an interactive and anonymous group talking therapy which allows participants to explore mental health-related topics. So Paige and Wally, feel free to unmute yourselves. Hi,
Hello.
how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. How about you?
I'm doing good. Um, is Wally here? Okay, hi. Okay, so let's get started on our discussion on preventing stress and burnout. The two of you may choose to take turns or jump in whenever you would like to do so and add on to each other's feedback and responses. And if anyone has any particular questions for Paige and Wale, feel free to write them down in the chat or use your mic.
Happy to jump in and out, Paige, if that's good with you. Or
Go for it.
Okay, great. So the first discussion prompt we have for you today is, what are some psychological and emotional signs of stress to look out for, and how do you check in with yourself?
Yeah, I'll kick off. So I think the signs to look out for is when you start having regular bad days. That would be the number one for me, just because, if you're used to feeling a certain type of way and you start having regular bad days, then you have to kind of try and identify what's going wrong, or if there's something new that you started doing, or if there's someone new in your life, or if there's a particular event that's gone on. And that's number one. That's the initial first tell sign for me. Um, and then another one, which I like, is when you stop being as social as you normally are. So when you start pulling away from kind of seeing your friends and doing the things that you normally do, it kind of indicates to me that there's been a change recently that you need to look into once again.
Okay, great, thank you. If you have anything to add, you can. Paige.
Totally. If I look at the specific signs of burnout, one of the first signs as well is physical and emotional exhaustion, where you're feeling extremely fatigued, even though you may still be doing the same things you usually do. Another one is, as you were mentioning, social isolation, or just even feeling detached from people. You may be present, but not really engaged, I guess, if I was to put it in that perspective. And one of the other ones is, and this one is pretty huge, especially right now, just feeling a lack of accomplishment or feeling a lack of achievement. I find that those two things, like if we don't feel like we're progressing, we feel stuck. And that within itself makes it lose that motivation to kind of like push yourself forward. So those are the three big things of burnout that I've noticed, especially recently.
Those are
100%.
really great. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I was just gonna add, in terms of just if you, I know I touched on this earlier, but if once you start finding that you're not happy doing what you're doing, I think it goes into your motivations as well. If you're doing something where you just don't feel motivated anymore, then it's probably a sign that you're either stressed or it's time to rethink essentially what has changed recently, and look deeper into your emotions, and that's where it comes good into doing maybe weekly mental health check-ins with yourself, just to kind of keep track of how your mood is going.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both so much. Those are really great tips and signs to look out for. So would one of you like to explain, or both of you, what is burnout for those who don't know?
I guess I kind of tapped into that a little bit with like the specific signs, but as you were saying, you just don't feel yourself. Like when you were talking about mental health, when we don't feel like we're achieving any well-being, I guess if we're trying to be specific about well-being, it's just having feelings of social connection with people and just working toward goals. But if you're still working hard and doing things, even if they're the exact same things you usually do, if it just doesn't feel right, like especially with nursing right now, there is that lack of compassion. There's compassion burnout and there's personal burnout. With compassion burnout, you're putting all your energy into people, but you're not feeling accomplished, and you're getting more emotional energy from other people because they're burnt out. And yeah, it's just overall just feeling not yourself, really.
Yeah, I think I believe the majority of your students. I'm a recent student myself, and for me, it kind of happens when you're not performing at the level that you're used to. Um, So, for example, it could just be, you're not working as fast as you normally would. You still might be working hard, but you're just not being as productive as you normally would. And it just kind of simply means you just need to take a break and walk away for a bit and reevaluate your environment. But that's one of the, I guess, most important tell factors for me is when you're just not performing at the rate you're normally used to. And sometimes it might not be burnout per se, it might just be the beginning of burnout. So it might be, having a off day, and that just, it doesn't happen straight away. You get tell signs, so it can just be having, like I said, an off day, and it just means, okay, you need to slow down a bit, take a bit of a break, and just walk away from your desk or walk away from wherever you are and come back to it.
That's a big sign for me too. I get like my loss of concentration suddenly is just like, I don't know what I'm even focusing on. I don't even know if I'm typing the right things. That's definitely what happens to me.
Okay, great. I think that was a really great explanation of like what burnout is for those who didn't know. And how does excessive burnout affect people's health in the long run?
Well, it leaves you susceptible to other illnesses, right? Because if you're feeling emotionally and physically exhausted, not only are you probably not going to attend to all of the physical needs that you need to do, you're not going to be attending to your emotional needs. You're not going to be processing the emotions because you don't have time, or you feel you don't have time. So you suddenly just feel kind of lost in the shuffle. And yeah, it just, the longer it goes, the more it starts to impact you more and more negatively, and it builds and compounds, and eventually you're either just going to get into a really deep depression, or your anxiety is just going to be through the roof because you don't have time to focus on you, or you're at least not giving yourself the time to focus on you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the negative parts for me is that you're no longer in control. So, for example, you could start out doing something that you really enjoy, but once it becomes over demanding and you find yourself being, I guess, somewhat of a victim to that task, then you're no longer in control. And in the long run, you're quote unquote a zombie to that thing. And that's where it becomes dangerous because you no longer enjoy it. You no longer have that passion for it or that motivation for it, and it becomes a chore. And well, no one wants to do chores back to back to back to back to back. I think it's when, for me, it's when you're no longer in control. That would be the kind of long-term effect. If that answers this question.
Great, thank you so much. So what are some like activities and exercises that you can use to quickly calm yourself? And are there any home remedies that can help with stress burnout?
Yeah.
You want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. 100%. For me, at the height of things, I was literally just going for a walk. I wouldn't pick a destination or anything like that. I'd just kind of sometimes turn my phone off and just go for a walk, and it helps me think. Whilst you're out for a walk, you tend to kind of find new environments and find new things that you never really were aware of before. Listen to really good music is another one. But one thing that's really, really good that works for a lot of people is breathing exercises. It doesn't necessarily have to be yoga, but just kind of pausing and focusing yourself on actually just breathing. That's really good. The Calm, I don't know if you've heard of Calm or Headspace, but they're really mental wellness apps to use for breathing exercises and things like that. Sleep, I don't know if it's exactly this defined as an exercise, but getting really, really good sleep is, something that's really, really needed during your student days, because I know a lot of the times it's kind of partying outside of COVID anyway. But getting, at least 8 hours sleep is really good for you. Listen to some good music as well, and just try and find the little things that make you happy. A good tip is to make note of the little things that make you happy, and not put it in a box. And anytime you're feeling down, stressed, or feeling burnt out, just go into that box and take note of those things that make you happy and do one of the things in there. Maybe one a week or twice a week.
Yeah, I personally like find going on walks really helps to clear my mind and like just put my phone away, get away from technology.
Yeah, 100%. And I know you said exercising, but rest, just rest, take a break, just sit back, go do something different, and just rest, really.
They are saying, actually, there is some scientific evidence showing that they did a bunch of studies on people who were athletes, and they found that the optimal amount of sleep for athletes was 9 hours. So our like 6 to 8 hour kind of ratio, it's like we should be pushing it more toward the 8, because
I agree.
wow, that's huge. Yeah, I actually recently heard a podcast from Brene Brown, and she was talking with 2 women who are the authors of Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And they have amazing suggestions. A walk was one of them, listening to music or using a creative expression. The other thing was connecting with people. And I know we can't physically connect with people at this point as much as maybe a lot of extroverts did before, but introverts too, when the choice is taken away from us, that's really impactful. And our ability to be kind to one another, kindness is one of the things that is one of the leading contributors to well-being. They're doing so many studies, like there's so much science behind it, that if we give kindness to others, we have a longer feeling of happiness, which is truly really cool, but we're lacking that ability. We're not having those quick interactions with a barista. We're not having those random compliments with a stranger. Like that stuff's not happening. And another one I really liked, and this is my absolute favorite, is laughter. They're doing studies about laughter and the social funniness of like darker topics and being able to have that relatability, and that even reminiscing about laughter or like a really funny moment you had with somebody can boost those feelings too. So those are all free things that you can do. Like you were mentioning home remedies, like all of the different options are really things that don't cost us anything. But there's also crisis lines. If you're feeling you need a professional person, call a crisis line. They actually, I know a friend who works for the Kids Helpline in Canada, and she said the majority of people calling are nurses.
Wow.
Which are adults. So it just goes to show how important it is for us to connect in every type of level, whether it's socially or professionally. It's ways to kind of break that cycle of feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, 100%. And just wanted to add as well, unconnected, that's probably one of the most important things in the world that we're living in right now with the current environment. And I guess coming from a Tally perspective, so what we do essentially is talking therapy, and being able to connect to people is at our core, and we identify the importance of that. So just being able to talk to someone, because you're never really going through these things alone. But it's very, very easy for you to think that you're going through it alone. And the best thing is to know that, you have a helping hand, you have someone who has gone through it and even most likely overcome it already. And just having that hope that it's possible to overcome this current scenario here and now. Because it's with mental health, because you can't see it, it's not like a scab or an injury that you see healing every day. It's easy to think, this is the end of days, but really, there is another side to it, and you can overcome it. So it's really good to speak to people about it and being able to meet people who have overcome those challenges.
Mm-hmm. That aloneness is so hard. It's so hard to feel alone. And those statistics that you were showing about like Gen Z and the percentage of that feeling of aloneness, so horrible. And we're in a socially connected world. Like we're all just talking right now via Zoom. Mm-hmm. And it's completely possible to connect with people, but it's about making the right connections versus just scrolling through things and wishing you had somebody's life, or seeing all the things that you're lacking versus all the things you can appreciate that you have. And yeah, it's about finding the right connections.
Great, thank you. And somebody in the chat asked if you could link the podcast, or maybe just tell me the name of it so I could write it down, please.
The Brene Brown podcast. So it's called Unlocking Us by Brene Brown. And the episode is called Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle, with Emily and Amelia, I'm going to butcher their last name, Nagoski. Very good podcast. It was like 50 minutes or so. It was great.
Thank you so much. Okay, I wrote the name in the chat, and hopefully the person who was asking heard that. And yeah. So how do you ensure that stressful situations in your personal life don't affect your work performance?
I let my stuff affect my work performance. And that's what I learned this year before COVID even hit. It was a big learning year for me of realizing that I just needed to take a step back. I quit drinking last year because I'm too busy with school. And I realized that I was not processing my emotions. I was distracting by going out, doing things with my friends, and not really letting whatever was happening at work or in my personal life sink in and actually think about it. So then once it was able to be out there and present and there was no avoiding it, that was like a huge learning curve for me, but it was necessary. And I highly stress that people kind of do some introspective learning because there's so much within us that we're avoiding. So much.
Yeah, 100%. I think for me, it's about finding the fine line between being able to leave work at work and, having home time to yourself. And now it's obviously ridiculously hard because a lot of people are working from home now. So a lot of people wake up and they go to their desk, which is also in their room or at their dining table. And now your work environment is your home environment. One of the things that really helps is having a nighttime routine, or having a morning routine. So one of the things I don't like doing is waking up for work. So I like waking up for myself, and that would kind of mean, especially now where people kind of wake up and walk to their desk, it means, wake up and do things for your own life before you actually check into work. So whether it be you wake up and watch an episode, I know we're speaking about comedy earlier, watch a comedic clip on YouTube or something that will make you laugh, go to the gym, watch a good movie that makes you happy, talk to, I don't know, family in the morning, have, proper breakfast in the morning, do things for yourself before you actually check into work. And then, at the end of the day, when you're done with work, switch off your work phone or, log out of your emails and, go do you, live your life for yourself. Also, you can set yourself challenges, even if it means, going for a walk every day after work, because that means you have to leave your house in order to kind of leave that work mentality. And when you're coming back, when you're returning back to your house, it means you're coming back with that, home or social life mentality, almost like you left the office or left school. So it puts you back into that zone and it puts you back into, I guess, having control of your day to day. Because it's very easy when you're not traveling back to work anymore. It's very easy for, I guess, your whole week to become one big blur, if you're not moving from your desk. But yeah, that'll be for me.
I love that you mentioned morning routines. And the best advice I ever got regarding morning routines is always put something in it that you enjoy. Do something that you look forward to doing for yourself, because if you do it first thing in the morning, you're not going to forget about it later in the day, or you're not going to be too tired to do it for you later in the day, especially if you're burnt out, right? Like if you have that burnout, you struggle to leave that work at work. And so it's about doing something for you. And I love that you tapped into that.
Yeah, 100%. It's your time as well, right? Because if you leave it to, during the day or after work, a lot of people can interrupt that time. But earlier in the morning, everyone's still kind of waking up or they're living their own lives. So you should also live yours, really.
Totally.
Great, thank you so much. Those are some great tips, morning routines and all of that. So what advice do you have for students who may feel guilty for taking time off for themselves when they have a lot of schoolwork piled up, since it all becomes kind of clumped together, home life and school?
I think that's a balance that we're all trying to work on. But it's about putting a mindset to it of something that is necessary to do. Nurses and healthcare professionals especially, we are the worst for making sure we take care of ourselves because we put so much care into others. It has to be a conscious decision and like a scheduled thing. I literally schedule self-care so that I don't put it to the side. So I don't feel guilty because it's already there and that is already planned. So that's a way that I can kind of just shift my mindset to this is something that is important. and necessary versus this is something that I could do to make maybe feel better. The reality is it's essential.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it's about being realistic and having a plan and asking yourself, what do you want to achieve out of school? Um, Unfortunately, not everyone's going to get a first or the highest grade. I don't think needs to get the highest grade because it's not all about, getting that high grade. It's about experience in school and taking advantage of all the benefits that school comes with. So I think, first of all, you need to ask yourself, what do you want to achieve and what do you need to do to achieve those things? And it's also about understanding, short-term sacrifice for long-term gain, and looking at that long-term gain and, questioning yourself to say, if I sacrifice all these things short-term and I get there, is it going to be worth it? And then, you're a bit more realistic with yourself and okay, yes, I'm putting in all this work now, but this is because I want to achieve this. And it comes back to what I said earlier about being in control. I think once you take those steps, you then know that even if you're working too hard this week or this month, it's for a reason, it's for an end goal. And if you set, kind of a low, I guess, or a more decent goal that you'd like to achieve, then okay, I've set this goal because I know I want to have more fun, or I want to be, I want to do more fun things with my friends, etc. Yeah.
It's like realistic and meaningful at the same time.
100%.
Great, thank you. And somebody in the chat asked if you have any advice for preventing burnout, especially when things start to feel out of control.
So, just because we touched on that a bit earlier, I'd like to couple that up with anxiety and depression a bit because I think earlier there was a question as to what burnout leads to, and Paige touched on it leading to depression down the line and stuff like that. And just to clarify, the question you asked was how to kind of fix when you're experiencing burnout.
Like how to overall prevent it, I think that's what they're
I think it's, sorry to repeat myself, but it's having a plan. There is a reason why we have weekends. You're not necessarily expected to kind of do schoolwork 7 days a week. So those breaks are there for a reason, and it's about being purposeful in how you use those breaks. So a lot of people tend to kind of, when the weekend comes, they just end up procrastinating in a different form. So either you find yourself just binge watching series, which isn't necessarily healthy if that's not what you actually plan to do with your weekend. So it's about being purposeful and, knowing, okay, I want to do this Saturday, or I want to do this Sunday, and going out to do that thing.
It's about adding joy to your life. It's just adding little bits and pieces of whether it's just like a relaxation time or if it's something fun, regardless of what it is. If, like you were saying, if it's a purposeful activity, that's a way to kind of break the cycle. And then you can start gauging, is this what it does help me feel better? Or is this something I'm doing because I'm supposed to do it for self-care? That's why I love self-love languages. I don't know if everyone has heard of those, but there's like the love languages, and now there's self-love languages where you get to assess like what kind of self-love do I like to give myself, and it really helps give you great ideas of different self-care activities that will bring joy, relaxation, meaning, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and just to add, do a self-mental check-in. So maybe at the end of the week, on a Friday or on a Saturday or even Sunday, turn everything off, turn off your phone, log out of emails or whatever you use to connect with people, and grab a pen and paper, or go for a walk, write down how your week went, what were the highlights and the low points, look at where your time was being spent during the week, and is that something you're comfortable with? Once again, short-term sacrifices, long-term gains, but also, set yourself a goal for the week, and set yourself challenges. It could be, doing something nice for someone. As Paige said earlier, kindness is something that really benefits our own personal mental health. So you can set little challenges for yourself like that, and when you start to monitor your week and what you do with your week, it's easier for you to kind of take more advantage, and I guess, take more advantage and notice what makes you suffer those burnout periods.
Well, if you're feeling sad, you're feeling depressed, and you feel like you need to cry or you feel like you need to yell, just let it happen. Don't suppress it. I know that a lot of people will be like, if I start, I'll never stop. You'll stop. You'll stop. It's okay. But letting it just actually come and letting yourself have a good cry and just release that, man, it can be pretty cathartic. So yeah, just if you're in a spiral, just let that emotion out. Let it be processed.
Yeah, 100%. And just to add, there's no even understatement of if I start, I'd never stop. If you feel like you'd never stop, then you probably should stop, because it means you're probably going to explode at some point and you're not going to be able to control it. So that means there's something there that you really do need to dig into then and actually work on.
Great, and you guys perfectly answered. Somebody asked another question, which you just answered as well, which was how to break out of a negative spiral. So you said just let it happen, right? And just have that moment, I guess. Do you have if you have anything else to add, how to break out of a cycle, you can. Feel free.
And do all the little tools we talked about too. That'll help break the cycle as well.
Yeah, I think, it's been said a lot, but just stop. If you feel like you're having a negative cycle or you're in a rut, just stop and kind of just take a break. It could even be just a 5-second break, and the first thing you probably want to do is acknowledge that you're in a negative cycle, and then identify why you feel like you're in that cycle. So what's wrong? Is it something that you're doing, or is it something that has changed? And then once you've acknowledged it, or once you've identified it, you can then look at how to fix it. And yeah, I think that's probably the best step to take about fixing it.
As much as we like to think we could just power through everything, there's only so long that can happen before our brain's like, help,
Thank you. I think someone raised their hand, so if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question, you can, and if not, I'll just move on. Okay. Okay, so the next question is, so there are some pre-meds currently tuning in to our webinar, and they may feel pressured or feel behind because students tend to compare themselves to others. So how do you deal with situations where you find yourself comparing yourself and your accomplishments to others?
Oh, there is a lot of competition, isn't there? It's hard because you're told you need to get the good grades to be able to be the best of the best. And if we identify our best as a number, we're going to be pretty disappointed when we're out of school and realize there's no more grades. There's no more numbers. We get our money, but that's irrelevant to a certain degree. So the grades may seem important now, but when we don't have those anymore, we need to find ways to feel like successful and feel accomplished without having a numerical value on it. So there's competition in real life too, but it's about really finding what works for you and what makes you feel like you're contributing the way that you went into medical school for. What was your purpose? Are you serving that purpose? And that's where it just kind of comes down to. In the meantime, of course, it's competitive. It's a really hard field to be in, and the numerical grade can sometimes help kind of boost that motivation and confidence. But when we compare it to another person's, you're minimizing your accomplishment. You've got way better grades than I'd ever be getting in med school. So like, you're killing it. So yeah, it's about putting that reference point to like what your best is and what you feel is good for you and your future and your practice.
Yeah, I agree. To add to that, we're living in a world where social media is so powerful today, and the way it's essentially set up is to compare yourself to others, and everyone posts the best side of themselves. And just going off what Paige said, to an extent, just compete with yourself, not with others. So if you achieve, one grade this time around, you want to do better. So yeah, just try and do better, not comparing yourself with others, because everyone has different journeys, everyone has different destinations, and everyone has different goals and abilities as well. And it's, identifying your strengths and weaknesses and using your personal experience to your advantage. Once again, I would stress, compete with yourself and your own standards and your own goals, rather than trying to compete with others, because you also, speaking mental health related, you also don't know what other people are going through. So yeah, just focus on yourself, and yeah, compete with your last performance, if you will.
Great. I think a lot of people can benefit from that advice. And this is somewhat unrelated, but someone's asking, what's the best way to deal with loss?
They're talking now more about, many people have heard of the 5 stages of grief, but they're now talking about a 6th stage of grief, where they're looking at finding meaning in a loss, which they're finding actually has more longevity than a lot of like just acceptance alone, but it's about finding the reasoning behind what happened, the lessons that you can learn from the loss, things like that. But I highly recommend, if you're feeling and experiencing loss, many people are, a lot of the feelings that people are experiencing through COVID is grief. We have a loss of our normal life, have a loss of a lot of activities we can't do, social interactions, all of these things, but we're all in these stages of grief. That's why sometimes it's like, oh, it's okay. Like, I don't mind sitting around in my pajamas. And then other times I'm like, I am so angry. So it's about, just kind of looking at those different stages. But if you look into the 6 stages of grief, David Kessler, I think is the name, David Kessler or David Kessler, he wrote a fantastic book on that.
Yeah, so at Tally, we've created like a really close-knit community. It's anonymous, and the whole point is to allow people to connect to one another and speak to one another about, mental health related topics, i.e. grief and loss. And I think 2 weeks ago, we partnered with an organization, a community for grief space. And the whole point was getting people together who have experienced loss and experienced grief, to come together and speak to each other and learn on how to overcome things from each other. And one of the things I took away from that is, with grief, don't try and hide it. You don't have to go through it alone. And you don't have to overcome it very quickly, because a lot of people always feel like they've overflugged their loss or the matter, or they've spoken too much. And you shouldn't let anyone rush you. Grief is a slow process, and everyone has an individual way of navigating that. That's probably the first stage for me. And the second thing, like I mentioned earlier, is speak to people, reach out there to people. Don't feel like you have to carry that burden yourself, because it's a heavy burden, and it will come up all the time. You could have fun, and you could see something that reminds you of that loss, which would bring those emotions out again. And it's okay. You don't have to hide in a bubble. Everyone goes through these things. And helping others as well empowers you to help overcome your own loss. So speaking to people who are even maybe in a worse position than you are, and helping them overcome that can help you as well.
Thank you so much. Okay, and so what mental health resources can students use to adapt to COVID-19?
So obviously, like I've mentioned, the Tally Talk platform, which allows you to connect to other students, etc. But then there are other kind of call-in services that you could use. I'm calling from the UK, so there are services like Samaritans in Mind, but I'm sure there are also others in Canada. Also, using yourselves, and I mean, your classmates, groups, and even speaking to your teachers, and even having platforms like you're doing now with Zoom. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to kind of invite an external speaker to come and speak, but it could just be a weekly or monthly catch up to find out how everyone's doing, how everyone's coping. Because these are the normal things you would do whilst being physically in school. It'd be, catching up with your friends and having a laugh together. And I still think trying to, find a way to keep that normal routine even during COVID is a good way.
Well, and even if you talk with your, like depending on what school you go to, a lot of them do have counseling services that are through your student union or even just through student services. And I'd mentioned before crisis lines, there's texting ones, there are ones that you can call, there are resources that are a bit more affordable for students, such as some of like the online platforms. They're just as qualified counselors as anyone in a private practice outside of the platform. Yeah, and just talking with your fellow students and that social connection, but it's about finding what works for you and what kind of what resonates with you, I guess, regarding what kind of care that you need. And it's doing that self check-in. It really is about doing that self check-in and seeing like, is my mood going, is it going up? Have I been stable? What's working? What's not working? And finding what, and then you can then start looking for the right resources for you based on knowing what you need, which could even be as simple as finding a podcast that's relatable or a YouTube video that's relatable and just doing that quick listen while you're driving to school or whatever you're doing. There's a lot out there. So once you kind of figure out what you're looking for, start searching for it.
Yeah, and I'd also add, try and take advantage of this time by trying to, learn something new. A lot of people have things that they've always wanted to do, but just haven't gotten the chance to do. But in this, in this period, whilst we're working from home, try and, learn something new. It could be art, it could be photography while you're going for a walk, or just do something, out of the blue that you never thought you would have really tried. And that could help you get over that could serve as a sort of distraction from your everyday schoolwork and kind of help you on that way.
If anyone is wanting to learn something new, I don't know if anyone heard of the course that's on Coursera. It's free and it's called The Science of Well-Being. I highly recommend if you have an interest in finding out more specific things about improving your well-being. I cannot rave enough about this course, and the fact that it's free and through Yale University makes it just that much better, and you can just do it from the comfort of your home. So yeah, the science of, I saw someone just said it's a fantastic course. I loved it. Absolutely obsessed. So yeah, definitely if you want to learn a new skill, it's about how to improve your well-being.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so we already touched on how to check in with yourself, but what tips do you have for checking in on friends and family who struggle with stress? Because sometimes it could be a bit awkward to do that.
So I would say the first thing is don't be too imposing when checking in on others, but don't let that put you up at the same time, because a lot of people suffer in silence, and it's normally worse than they let on. So just through automatically whenever you ask someone how you doing, the answer you normally get is, oh yeah, fine or not bad. But a lot of the time people are going through it much worse than they let on. So if the decision is between you coming up as annoying or badgering someone or keeping them above water and helping them in the long run, then I'd rather you kind of be annoying and ensure that they're okay. Because a lot of people suffer in silence, like I said, until it's too late. Also let them know that we're all human and we all go through things, and they don't necessarily have to go through it alone. But most importantly, if you have empathy, if you have true empathy, then show it. Use true empathy to let them know that you've experienced something yourself, and it's not just them once again going through it alone. And another way to get people to talking to you is showing them that you're not perfect yourself and you need help yourself, or trying to get them to help you, and that way it shows them that they actually have the power to help others, so they might even have the power to help themselves, and you can help each other.
Another thing that's important to think about is if you don't know a lot about suicide, I highly recommend looking into the warning signs about suicide, whether that's to kind of tap into yourself of whether you're having thoughts or if you're starting to show signs, or what you can look out for in your friends. Because there's a lot of people who will complain about their stressors, but stating the actual emotion or some of the thoughts that they're having behind it can be really hard for people. So if I have a friend who is talking a lot about what is going on with them and just talking about their stressors, I'll ask, like, what kind of emotions are you feeling? And from there, if I'm starting to get concerned because I'm seeing warning signs or hearing warning signs, I'll just say something as simple as, you know, with all this stress, are you having any thoughts of suicide at all? Like, have you thought about ending your life and all this? And that within itself can be so huge, because then they reflect on, yes, I am, or no, I'm not, or whatever's going on. But suicide is something that I'm quite concerned about in the near and far future because of COVID. So there's a lot of changes that are happening in people's lives that are out of our control. And so suicide is something people can control, is their perception that they can take their own life, which suicide attempts are very infrequently effective. So yeah, it is something to talk about if you're getting the vibes.
Yeah, and I should add as well, the worst thing is for you to ignore it. So even if you feel like you can't approach them yourselves, feel free to, I don't know, talk to a school counselor and tell them you're worried about that person. Because the worst thing for you is just to kind of, you know, ignore it and turn a blind eye to that.
Look into crisis services in your community as well. Sometimes there are police teams with a nurse that can go to people's homes, do a wellness check. There are also sometimes crisis management teams who will even just do a phone call as a wellness check. Just those little things can be helpful. If you don't feel equipped to manage their thoughts, then at least you can kind of reach out to healthcare professionals who might be able to kind of have a good chat with them and help them find the resources they need.
Okay, great. Thank you both so much for answering all of our questions. If you have anything last notes to add or say to everybody, you can feel free.
I guess, yeah, you can find us on Instagram at tally.at, and on LinkedIn as well at tally@. And yeah, feel free to, I think you probably get notifications via Instagram and the link in our profile to join one of our Tally Talks. And yeah, that's for me. But it's been great. Thank you for the platform, and I hope you're all doing well. And I think most importantly, like I've been trying to point out, remember that you all have each other if anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, my Instagram handle is at anotherchapter.ca. And it is a wellness with lots of quotes and just positive affirmations, reflective questions, that kind of stuff. But feel free to message, because I'm more than happy to answer more questions for people. I will always talk mental health, so do not feel nervous about messaging me.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Wale and Paige, for the very helpful advice. We hope that everyone is able to learn from the discussion we had and are able to implement these self-care strategies into your own lives to prevent burnout.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me too.
Thank you for participating. So next we will move on to the science behind wellness and mental health, and we'll explore how mental illnesses impact physiological processes in the body.
Okay, so first we'll talk about different types of mental health disorders and how they affect everybody in different ways. So the first disorder I will be covering is anxiety. So what is anxiety? Anxiety is how we describe the lasting feelings of worry and stress. It is the body's natural response to stress, but severe and lasting anxiety could indicate an anxiety disorder that has physiological effects. It affects around 264 million people worldwide. There are several factors associated with anxiety that make it linked to acid reflux disease. Acid reflux is a condition where acid from the stomach leaks back up into the esophagus. It occurs because anxiety and stress can reduce the pressure in the lower esophageal sphincter, which is the muscle that keeps the stomach closed and prevents acid from leaking. Muscle tension around the stomach can increase pressure in the stomach and push the acid, resulting in an increase in stomach acid production. Gastrointestinal disorders can also be caused by stress. There has been evidence to prove that there is a link between stress and the symptoms of gastrointestinal disorders, because stress affects the digestion in the intestines and stomach. Poor digestions caused by stress can lead to acid buildup in the stomach that moves to the esophagus, causing heartburn. Now, you might be wondering, what happens to the body when you are stressed? The amygdala is responsible for governing your survival instincts. So once you're in a stressful situation, the amygdala sends a signal to the hypothalamus, and then signals are sent to the adrenal glands and produce epinephrine hormones. These hormones circulate throughout the body, causing physiological changes, including an increased heart rate and increased blood pressure. Memory loss and an inability to focus or think may also occur in these stressful circumstances. This is because stress hormones, like cortisol, which result in poor brain function when there is too much of this hormone. Stress can also kill brain cells and shrink the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for memory and learning. Something to consider is that stress can also increase the risk of heart problems, lead to high blood pressure, arterial damage, or irregular heart rhythms, and a weakened immune system. So next, we'll talk about depression. Depression is the constant and intense feeling of sadness and loss for long periods of time, which stop you from doing normal daily activities. It affects how you feel in things you enjoyed. Similar to anxiety, depression can also cause many other conditions that affects physiological processes in the body. Depression is a considerable risk factor for heart diseases. People living with depression are known to have higher risk of cardiovascular diseases when compared to those without depression. This is because mental health disorders such as depression cause an increase in cortisol, heart rate, and blood pressure, leading to a buildup of calcium in the arteries and resulting in heart disease. Something to consider is that diagnosing depression in those with heart diseases can be difficult since they share symptoms such as tiredness and low energy due to the side effects of medications that treat heart conditions. Depression can also affect how well people with heart disease recover. Patients who have suffered from heart attacks and have depressions are less likely to be motivated to follow healthy routines, which would affect how they recover from heart diseases, such as skipping medication, avoiding exercise, unhealthy eating, as well as harmful behaviors such as smoking or drinking alcohol. This is because people experiencing a mental disorder may have fewer healthy coping strategies, making it difficult for them to make healthy lifestyle choices to reduce their risk for heart disease. Now, we'll move on to PTSD. What is PTSD? PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is a mental illness that is caused by any type of trauma. When somebody has a traumatic experience, the reptilian or brainstem takes over, shutting down all non-essential body and mind processes, and the nervous system increases stress hormones to prepare for fight or flight. This is why 20% of trauma survivors develop PTSD or have some sort of anxiety related to past trauma. Some symptoms of PTSD include intrusive thoughts, mood changes, avoidance, unaccepted rage or tears, memory loss, concentration challenges, and nightmares. So after trauma, the brain can change biologically. There are 3 major brain function dysregulations: the overstimulated amygdala, the underactive hippocampus, and ineffective variability. First, let's take a look at the overstimulated amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for survival-related threat identification. So after trauma, the amygdala is high alert and perceives threat everywhere. And because the amygdala is overactive, more norepinephrine, a stress hormone, is released and is not well regulated by the prefrontal cortex. This causes sleep disruption, reactive anger, impulsivity, increased fear and anger, as well as decreased positive emotions. Next, we have the underactive hippocampus, which regulates motivation, emotion, learning, and memory. An increase in glucocorticoid, a stress hormone, kills cells in the hippocampus, making it less effective in making connections for memory. Lastly, let's take a look at ineffective variability. Constantly elevated stress hormones interfere with the body's ability to regulate itself. This causes the sympathetic nervous system to remain active, leading to a fatigued body. Now we'll talk about how childhood trauma affects the brain. First, we'll talk about insula. So insula is a small region of the cortex that plays a role in basic survival needs. It controls the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems and plays a role in the immune system. In healthy male and female brains, there are no structural differences in insula, but In males and females who have survived trauma as children, there are differences in size. So for example, males who have experienced trauma in their childhood were found to have larger insular volume and surface area than healthy males, while females had a smaller insular volume and surface area than healthy females. This evidence shows that trauma can affect brain development in males and females differently. So trauma can also impact your learning. For example, when cortisol, a stress hormone, is in excess, it damages the CA3 neutrons in the hippocampus. Damage to the hippocampus impairs memories and therefore affects the ability to learn and retain information. This combination of emotional and physiological problems caused by trauma can impair children's performance in school.
Thank you, Elaine. So now we'll be talking about therapeutic science and the products involved. First, we'll have Nancy talk about how TMS is being used to treat depression, and then we'll transition to a new and revolutionizing innovation to diagnose PTSD, which will be presented by Dr. Jennifer Perezini.
To start, I'll give some background. Depression is a very prominent form of mental illness in the collective Canadian society. As Canadians are working hard to destroy the stigma and increase awareness, new medical practices are emerging across the nation in order to treat this disease. And here is where TMS comes into play. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, commonly referred to as TMS, is an electromagnetic, non-invasive form of brain stimulation that works to relieve symptoms of depression. During TMS, a coil generates a magnetic field in an attachment secured to the patient's head, near the prefrontal cortex, which is the section of the brain responsible for mood regulation. Due to the change in the magnetic field, an electrical current is produced. This electrical current regulates and repairs electrical pathways in the brain that are not properly conveying signals. A big positive of TMS therapy is the minimal side effects it causes compared to other forms of treatment for depression. The worst side effect noted after TMS is a headache or muscle soreness. On the contrary, antidepressants can pose very severe effects. The FDA concluded from a study of over 4,400 children and 24 antidepressants that the use of antidepressant medication is actually linked to an increased chance of suicidal patterns in children and adolescents. TMS therapy has also yielded great results in patients. Approximately 50% to 60% of people who haven't received results with antidepressant medication have received some form of improvement of symptoms with TMS therapy. And approximately 1/3 of these individuals noted a full resolution of their symptoms. The effects of TMS are long-lasting and effective, as currently the remission rate is only 20% following treatment. TMS is also much less intimidating than its counterpart treatment, which is Electroconvulsive Therapy, or EC therapy. EC therapy works by inducing a seizure in the patient while under general anesthesia. For many patients, this can cause a sensation of fear and panic. TMS offers a much more calming approach, so young patients or patients who are intimidated by anesthesia can feel safe coming to treatment. For a typical treatment of TMS, patients will experience 3 to 5 treatments per week for a period of 4 to 6 weeks. The full course of treatment can cost anywhere from $6,000 to $12,000. As of now, Ontario directs about $3.5 billion to the $51 billion health budget on mental health and addictions. Considering the influence and presence of depression and mental health, this can be considered a reasonable allocation of funds. In considering the long-term success of TMS treatment, it would be more cost-effective than antidepressants or other treatment options, such as EC therapy. However, one must consider the ease of implementation of this technology in other healthcare centers, which would provide the more significant economic burden. However, Dr. Jonathan Downar, a clinical scientist and assistant professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Institute of Medical Science at the University of Toronto, is developing a take-home version of TMS that would cost less than $5 per session and last 3 minutes instead of the typical 30-minute session. The device could be reused by successful patients, leading to a more cost-effective solution, as less devices would be required to be manufactured. So, Even though TMS therapy is expensive in the present, with scientific and technological advancements, it could be quite a realistic and preferable method of treatment.
Thank you, Nancy. So next we will have Dr. Jennifer Perezini, a neuroscientist who is also the CEO and founder of Neurovation Labs, a company that created the first objective treatment for PTSD and has revolutionized the way PTSD can be diagnosed. All right, whenever you're ready, Dr. Perezini.
Sure, I'm just trying to, oh, I can't share my screen.
Oh, I think I have to make you a host.
Oh, I think I can go. Let me see.
Okay, great.
Okay, can you see it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for the intro. Again, my name is Jennifer Perezini. I am the CEO of Neurovation Labs, and I'm so happy to be here today to talk a little bit about my company as well as my transition from neuroscientist to entrepreneur, and to give a little bit of advice and some tips on how you can turn your great ideas, your research and ideas, into something that can really make an impact. So just to give a brief overview, what I'll talk about my journey into neuroscience, and I'll go into some of my key findings for my dissertation, which is something I hardly ever present anymore. It's been so long. I'll talk about my company and the transition into forming the company, and my side project right now, which is a brand new nonprofit, PTSD Recovery Foundation. And then at the end, I'll get into some advice and hopefully some Q&A at the end. So just a little bit about me. I'm a New Yorker, born and bred. I went to Barnard College at Columbia University for my undergraduate degree. I then made the trek out west to UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, where I studied the mechanisms of fear sensitization and learning with Dr. Michael Fanslow. I then moved back to New York to do a very quick postdoctoral fellowship at Columbia University, where I studied rodent models of Alzheimer's and aging. And now I am the founder and CEO of Neurovation Labs, my biotech company. I'm also the director of two wonderful nonprofits. One, PTSD Recovery Foundation, is brand new, and the other, Women in Learning. We just celebrated our 10th birthday, which is very exciting. We formed that back when I was in grad school, and that is for the advancement of women in science. And I was just recently named chair of my college's Entrepreneurs Network, which I'm really thrilled about. And that really allows me to work with entrepreneurs across all different industries, not just healthcare and biotech. So why neuroscience? I get this question a lot. I was always interested in science growing up. It was my best subject. I loved chemistry lab in high school and getting my hands dirty. In college, I thought I would go get my MD, as a means to an end, but I really wanted to do some sort of medical research, and I just had no clue how to get there. I was completely in love with the neuroscience and psychology portions of my science classes in college. So after switching my major from chemistry to biology to eventually neuroscience, I was finally able to join some labs and figure out what I wanted to do. I worked at a few labs at Columbia University Medical Center, and I really got to hone in on my interests. I started actually in some schizophrenia labs, but I was truly more interested in anxiety and coping mechanisms. And this is really for personal reasons. So 2001, I like to say, was my original 2020. This was the year that my life got flipped completely upside down, first with 9/11, and then the death of my grandfather, my mother, and even my dog, all within the same month. And 19 years later, and that time of year is still so surreal for me. But I watched how some people in my family and in my community, with the loss of all of our loved ones, coped really well, and had some had developed really aberrant coping mechanisms. So this led me to Dr. Fanslow's lab at UCLA, working on our rodent model of PTSD. So getting into my grad school days, I studied post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, which you've already heard a little bit about. This was very relevant for me at the time. I really specifically studied the mechanisms underlying stress, sensitized fear learning, and responding in a rodent model of PTSD. So because of my personal history, this was very relevant, but I feel like now more than ever, with the global health crisis and the social unrest, I feel like this is really in the spotlight again. PTSD is really in the spotlight again. And I'm so excited to talk about my research for the first time in a very long time. So what is PTSD? We can just briefly review that. It's a mental health disorder that develops after exposure to a traumatic event with long-lasting symptoms such as flashbacks, avoiding event memories, and hyperreactivity. Now, there are really two major issues at hand. First is that there are no objective diagnostics for PTSD. It's currently diagnosed using subjective and imprecise symptom checklists long after symptoms have already manifested, leading to things like underdiagnosis and misdiagnosis. This is incredibly problematic. We view mental health disorders as physical disorders with physical underpinnings, and we should really be able to have an objective test, like say for cancer, or even more timely for COVID. Also, existing medications are hardly effective. They're really only band-aids for select symptoms. And cognitive therapy or talk therapy is really great, but it tends to be ineffective for veterans and military. It's actually ill-advised due to the nature of their traumas and the stigma surrounding PTSD for them. And therapy can be emotionally painful, which leads to high dropout rates. Now, PTSD is a crisis for military and veterans alike, and it is a huge problem. Over 8% of Americans, same goes for Canadians, are suffering from PTSD at any given time, caused by events like rape, accidents, natural disasters, and yes, even the current pandemic. The prevalence of PTSD is even higher, as I alluded to, in active duty military and veterans, contributing to a number of other issues such as suicide, drug abuse, homelessness, and joblessness. The sheer lack of proper diagnostic and treatment tools is a major healthcare gap, and that creates a huge market, a $16 billion market in the US alone. Now, my entire dissertation, I use the stress-enhanced fear learning model of PTSD, or Cephalo. Cephalo blends different types of learning techniques or learning procedures to examine how exposure to a traumatic stressor can affect future fear responding. And we really care about this learning component of PTSD because we really believe, as this had been mentioned before, that aberrant learning is really creating these aberrant sensitized memories. So we really cared a lot about this in building our model. So the trauma is modeled by placing a rat in a conditioning chamber, which we call context A. It has a very specific grid floor, lighting, smell, etc. And we give 15 unsignaled mild shocks, not meant to hurt, just meant to startle, randomly over 90 minutes, and this is unpredictable for them. Sometime later, they're placed in a completely novel context, context B. This could be the next day, or it can be months out. Usually we do, to shorten the procedure, we do the next day. So they're not scared of this context at first. It's completely novel for them. There's nothing scary about it. However, we give them a single shock in context B and then put them back in the context the next day just to see their fear level now to this new context. Typically, as you can see in this bar, the light gray bar, one shock conditions a very low level of freezing during this test. And freezing is a measure of fear. However, in the animals that received 15 shocks in context A, they show an exaggerated freezing when they get that one shock in B, just like they received that 15 shocks all over again. Now, we call this Cephalo, stress-enhanced fear learning. And we believe this effect is similar to that experienced by PTSD patients, in which exposure to a traumatic event causes sensitized reactions to less intense but similar stressors. And Dr. Fanslow calls this really more than a model, it's a replica, because we can mimic most of the symptoms of PTSD as listed in the diagnostic manual. Now, when I present this to investors, I really stress that we have a well-validated animal model of PTSD, and we always include this table from one of my papers really paralleling the symptomatology of PTSD and Cephalo. And this is really important, especially for brain-related biotech companies, neurobiotech companies, because the percentage of successful drugs making it to market is less than 10%. And we really believe that this is because of poor animal modeling. Bad models lead to drugs that are destined to translate poorly to humans. Now, this is our key data. I generally don't present this anymore, and there have been years of research leading up to this, but I'm going to highlight just a couple of graphs just to show what we turned into the company. These are our main data points here. So briefly, we wanted to look at glutamate receptor subunit levels in the amygdala after Cephalo. Now, why the amygdala? As it has already been mentioned, the amygdala is the fear center of the brain. And why glutamate? Glutamate is a very important chemical messenger in the brain that tells cells to fire. This is called an excitatory neurotransmitter. And GLUA1, which you're going to hear a lot about in the coming slides, makes up part of a glutamate receptor called the AMPA receptor. It's a subunit of the AMPA receptor. And it's necessary for cell communication and cell firing, as well as memory formation. And particularly in the amygdala, this brain region, it's important for fear memory. Now, using the same exact model, 15 shocks in A, 1 shock in B, test their fear, we actually were able to measure, on average, a 2-fold increase in GLUA1 protein after Cephalo. And that's what you can see here highlighted in the black bar, this elevated level of GLUA1 in the amygdala. And here we just have another graph depicting the exaggerated freezing, again with the stressed animals, same as what I had already presented. Now, we've done this experiment many, many times, all different iterations, and we see that this increase actually starts right after the 15 shocks, right after this trauma, and lasts the lifespan of the animal. And this is a brand new discovery that we made. And we usually see that this GLUA1 subunit decreases back to normal levels after a learning event and gets replaced by other subunits. But when we see sensitized learning, sensitized fear learning, this level does not decrease in the amygdala. So this is more key data that I'll present to validate targeting GLUA1 or GLUA1 containing AMPA receptors in the amygdala. So using, again, the same exact Cephalo model, 15 shocks in A, 1 shock in B, and then test their fear. We did infusions right into the amygdala of GLUA1 antisense oligonucleotides. And what this does is it's blocking the translation into GLUA1 protein. So we infused antisense right into the amygdala after the 15 shocks, and we were actually able to block Cephalo. And that's what you can see in this last graph here. The third bar, the last black bar, we see actually a lower level of freezing back to really this 1 shock level that I had been showing earlier, compared with the animals that were stressed and just had vehicle infused instead. And this actually lasted long term. I tested the rats out a few weeks, and while they still had fear to context A, which is great, that's adaptive, you want them to be scared of the trauma context, they didn't have this exaggerated fear to context B anymore. It was always at this 1 shock level. we were actually able to still recephalate them or rescare them, which is a good thing. That means the amygdala is still functional. And this is really showing that GluA1 does have a necessary role in maintaining PTSD symptoms. We did many other experiments using other drugs to block GluA1, and our hypothesis regarding GluA1 was still always supported. So keeping those graphs in mind and that main piece of data that GluA1 in the amygdala is increased after a trauma, I'm going to talk about my transition now back from neuroscience into entrepreneurship and the startup world. So flashback to March of 2015, almost 7 years ago, I was already doing my postdoc. I had already graduated with my PhD. And I had a conversation with Dr. Famsla, with Michael, and I never really wanted to be a professor or to have a lab in university, and I always thought about the translational aspects of my research, and I was incredibly unhappy doing research in my postdoc. And so Michael and I decided that if we were going to try and commercialize our discoveries, then now was the time. So I began talking to an old friend who is a patent lawyer, and he's now actually general counsel and COO of my company. But we filed our first patent, and then I started thinking about who I wanted on my team and started building a network and reaching out to anyone even remotely relevant or anyone that would even answer my calls who could help me. And exactly a year later to the day, on March 31st, 2016, we officially became a real company. And that company is Novation Labs. This is something that we sometimes present to investors. So our mission is to revolutionize the way PTSD is diagnosed and treated. We are founded by scientists, and we're leveraging our biomarker discovery, that GluA1 increase in the amygdala, as well as our patent pending technology to develop 2 novel products, our objective diagnostic for PTSD, as well as a targeted treatment for PTSD. And this is really the first ever viable biomedical solution for the disorder. And our goal really at the end of the day is to end the PTSD epidemic as we know it. So this is also something we tend to present to investors, and we really break down that data that I had just shown you into a really pretty little infographic so non-scientist investors can understand. So again, after a trauma, GluA1 protein in the amygdala is increased. This leads to increased GluA1 containing AMPA receptors in the amygdala to which glutamate can bind. This then leads to amygdala hyperexcitability and sensitivity, as well as a stronger trauma memory, which all leads to the crux of PTSD, these PTSD symptoms. So now we are leveraging this regional protein increase, our discovery, to detect and treat PTSD. Now our first product is our diagnostic. It's actually a radio tracer to be used in something like a PET scan or other widely available imaging techniques. I'm sure you've seen or experienced getting a contrast dye put into your arm for an MRI. Well, this is just like that. It's just specific to detecting our biomarker GluA1 or GluA1 containing AMPA receptors. So where we are now, we've developed the tracer. We're now optimizing it for imaging. We're expecting to be approaching clinical trial prep in the next 12 months in a perfect COVID-free world with expedited FDA approval possible. Our second product is our companion treatment. It is a small molecule drug that will bind to and block our biomarker, these GluA1 containing AMPA receptors, to relieve that amygdala hyperexcitability and thereby alleviate PTSD. We've tested this preclinically, as I've shown you in a couple graphs, and we saw a reversal of nearly all PTSD symptoms. Now, we are in the discovery phase, which means that we're about to do drug discovery. We've built a really great cell platform or a cell line. Spent many years doing so, and the cell line expresses our biomarker, our GluA1, as well as an amygdala tag. And what that is just an amygdala specific protein that will allow our drug to be regionally specific. And as you can see in this pretty purple picture right here, what we have is our cells expressing our biomarker and the amygdala tag. When we add glutamate, we see that actually the cells brighten and glow. And what this is telling us is that not only is GLUA1 successfully being formed, it's coming together to form these GLUA1 containing AMPA receptors to which glutamate can bind, and eventually our drug candidates will bind. So we're about to do our screening for our earliest drug candidates. It's actually happening right now, and I've been told we should be getting a nice Christmas present, but we'll see. And this will be a major milestone for us. Now, with our diagnostic and companion treatment, we can potentially diagnose faster than ever before symptoms even manifest, because right now in the manual, we need 30 days of symptoms before PTSD can be diagnosed, and that is a long time to be suffering. We can even detect disease severity, which we do have some preclinical data on, and we can even use this tool to determine current treatment efficacy on the drugs that are already out on the market and see how well that they're working. And we can even streamline treatment routing once we get this tool in place. Now, just a bit of company history. I always like to include this slide to show how long it takes and all the moving parts that go into one or two little results. So again, we started the company back in March of 2016. A few months later, we closed our first funding round. We always mention funding. Our most recent is that we had an Air Force contract now, which is really exciting, as well as a few Army awards, and we're very, very thankful for this funding. We've formed a board containing amazing scientists and military advisors, as well as business people. And we always like to highlight just a couple scientific milestones. For example, February 2019, we had designed some diagnostic tracers and filed additional patents. And earlier this year, we began our drug screening process. Now, speaking of all the moving parts, I thought it would be fun to show you what my roles are as a CEO of a small biotech business, if anyone ever has the itch to go off and do this on their own. The short answer is I do absolutely everything. I'm no longer just a scientist. I actually do almost no science anymore. So I do a lot of investor relations, communicating to investors our goals and our mission. I communicate to our shareholders and our board on behalf of the company. I do a lot of HR, human resources. I'm constantly evaluating the work of the other members of my team. I have to do a lot of risk assessment, always maintaining awareness of the competition or seeing if there's any expansion opportunities or way to pivot our research. I'm always ensuring that our company has a high social responsibility wherever it does business. I have to still manage the R&D, even though I'm no longer performing the research on my own, but I'm always coming up with strategic goals and making sure that they're measurable and describable. And then I have my day-to-day operations, which are unpredictable and are always changing. So in general, I'm always pitching or networking in some kind, emails, calls, a lot of Zoom meetings these days. I'm speaking to my program managers at the DoD. I'm checking in on my research always. Again, we are using something called a contract research organization, which basically means that we don't have our own lab, we don't have a brick and mortar. We pay other scientists to run the research that we have designed and analyze the data. And this allows for quality assurance and quality control while keeping our budget pretty lean. Reading up on the competition always, doing PR, including social media, reviewing any new contracts that come in, even legal. I always like to be a part of everything. And then we're constantly refining the story and searching for new funding avenues. As a startup, you're never not looking for funding. So just to mention my new side project, we recently started a new nonprofit for PTSD wellness and healthcare called PTSD Recovery Foundation of America. We unfortunately had bad timing and started this right before the pandemic. So what we've been able to do thus far is some trauma-focused yoga virtually. But as we move into in-person events again, we'd love to hold some fundraisers and other great in-person events, hopefully sooner rather than later. And another part of PTSD Recovery Foundation is our educational arm, PTSD Authority. It's a public service initiative to provide information and resources about PTSD. We have a learning component, we have forums, news, we even have this interactive map to search for treatment centers in your area. Right now we just have the US, but we're looking to expand. And I thought I would end with some advice on how to build a startup, or really how to commercialize in any of your amazing ideas. I'm sure you all have. I think this is incredibly important now as we're trying to come up with urgent solutions for the healthcare crisis that is ongoing. So just some advice, what I've learned in the last 5 years, confidence is absolutely key. Fake it till you make it, smoke and mirrors always, and your ideas are gold. I think this is important to start and really build up your confidence because you know, sometimes people are just so afraid to go for it, thinking that it'll never make it, but I think it's so incredibly important to flesh out your own ideas. It's not about being the best, it's about adding value to the market. And this is important too, going back to the first 2 points, where you don't have to have the best idea since sliced bread. You just have to be able to change your field in a meaningful way and find your niche. The CEO does not have full control. And this means a few different things. So I left academia thinking that I can have more control over what information I was able to get out there and that it would be more fast-paced. It's definitely not. And now running a startup, I surrounded myself with many people who are incredibly intelligent and have been in business much longer than I have. So they really dictate my schedule, as well as our investors. You know, I really just try to defer to people who I think know better than me and can teach me to make our company a success. Don't say no to anything. Go to all the conferences you can afford. Do every speaking engagement, and exposure is really great. And on the flip side, don't take no for an answer. Going back to that, confidence is key. You know, I heard 1,000 no's from investors until I finally heard a yes, and it takes a lot of patience. But, you know, as long as you keep believing in your ideas, you can definitely make it. Imposter syndrome never goes away. I hate to tell you, I suffered from it in high school and college, and I still do, and sometimes think I'm a fake. But again, try to go back to those first 2 points, that you must have confidence to get your products across to the finish line. However long you think it takes, multiply it by 10 years. So whatever great ideas you have, start right now. I left academia thinking that biotech would be much faster moving. It's really not. Fundraising is very hard, and you have to have the right timing for things. I think now, especially things that are during COVID, anything that's related to PTSD or mental health is really, really important. So these ideas matter. And just because no one has ever done it before does not mean you cannot do it. Great ideas are born all the time, and it only takes one person to come up with it. And I always encourage everyone to flesh all of their ideas out, ask the right questions, ask any question, call anyone up to ask for help, to really get your ideas fleshed out. So that's what I have for you. I'm happy to take any questions on anything. I know we jumped around going from data to the company to nonprofits, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perezini, for the amazing presentation. So Paige asked a question. So she said, in your research, have you come across adjustment disorder as well?
So no, I've only done preclinical work. I have only worked with rodents. I am not a clinician. So my focus was always on PTSD, depression, and anxiety.
Great, thank you. So if anybody has any questions, you can ask about her doctoral work on her company. Okay, Paige, you can unmute yourself.
I was just clapping at the response.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. So I have a few, if nobody has any questions, I have a few questions. So what are the differences you've noticed between the academia life and working in a company, and what struggles did you face during this jump?
I think there are a lot of differences. I actually just gave a talk on this a couple of weeks ago, but I feel like in academia, while it seems risky, trying to get a professorship or a postdoc, you have much more job security than you think, especially more than starting a startup. I thought that in academia and working in a lab, I absolutely loved it. I love doing research, and that's one component I miss. But I feel like I have much more freedom now to do what I want, and it's not slowed down by waiting for my data to get into a journal or things like that. On the flip side, I do actually miss the camaraderie of a lab. I don't get to talk science as much as I would like anymore. So, and my lab in grad school was like my family. So it is very different. I think while it's still slow, biotech does have to be still faster than in academia, because you always want to be ahead of your competition no matter what. And it's definitely more risky. Definitely didn't have a salary for quite some time. Very blessed to have a very supportive family and husband to get me through those dark times. But yeah, I think the risk was the biggest thing. And to answer the second part of your question, there were many complications switching. I think I kind of didn't realize how risky it was going to be. I didn't think it was going to be that difficult to raise money. I thought that everybody thought PTSD was an important problem, and investors don't necessarily share your passion. They just want a return on investment a lot of times. So I think that was the biggest issue for me, is just really how long it took to get things off the ground.
Great, thank you. And what advice do you have for young aspiring neuroscientists who want to follow in your footsteps?
Definitely still go get your PhD, maybe even do a postdoc or two. I never discount the postdoc. I did one, forced myself to do one, and it wasn't my best experience, but I still was able to learn new techniques. I learned how to write grants, which actually is coming in handy now. That seems to be all I'm doing during this pandemic, is writing contracts for the government. So, definitely pursue your PhD. And, I knew what I wanted to do going in. I really was interested in anxiety and PTSD. But if you're just interested in general in the brain and you're not quite sure what you want to hone in on yet, rotate. PhD programs have great rotation options, so you can really get a feel of everything that's out there and the techniques you like and don't like, and what you find really interesting, and you might be shocked.
Great, thank you. And somebody has a question. They asked, what advice do you have for undergraduates who are interested in securing a research internship or placement?
During undergrad, I always had a position over the summer, and then in my last 2 years of college, I was able to work in the hospital associated with my college. It was difficult at first when I was younger as a sophomore. I remember so many years ago, but I had emailed a bunch of different researchers from every different department to see if they had any room. I think the one thing is you have to accept likely not getting paid and just understand that it's going to be a research position. Maybe during the school year you can do it for credit. But I think, email everyone that you can think of, especially if you have a topic that you're very interested in. And don't be afraid to ask your professors either. They were really the ones that guided me and really helped me find the different labs I wanted to be in.
Thank you. So what stage are your products in, and are they on the market or currently in clinical trials? I think you touched on this a bit, actually.
Yeah, so we are still in R&D. Again, this kind of thing takes forever. So our diagnostic has been made. It is being optimized preclinically, and we expect to get into FDA mandated toxicity screens and all those great things before clinical trials in the next 12 months or so. The treatment always takes a little bit longer as a small molecule drug discovery project, and that's really our long haul project. And so we are just screening for drug candidates now. So that'll be probably 24 months until we start thinking about clinical trials. We have been thinking about clinical trials. Obviously, you always have to think ahead, and we are already talking to different groups within the military to be able to run those early ones.
Thank you. So how can one get involved in your organization or support your organization?
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So PTSD Recovery Foundation, again, it's brand new. I cannot wait until we can have some real fundraising events. You can certainly donate. We're also part of Amazon Smile. You can just type our names in. And I can type in the chat later our website. It's just ptsdrecoveryfdn.org, actually. And so, yeah, we can certainly, if you follow us on Instagram, Twitter, we always provide updates if we're having virtual events you'd like to attend, and anything groundbreaking that comes up in person in the next, hopefully, year.
Thank you so much. Okay, that was great. Thank you. Everybody can take down the social medias to follow up. So thank you to everyone who joined us today, and a big thank you to our speakers, Paige, Wale, and Dr. Perezini. If you have any questions, please forward them to contactgensci@gmail.com. And that concludes our Self-Care is Healthcare workshop. So have a great evening, everyone.